Thank you so much for joining us online here at Fam Church for our message series, Best Question Ever. Now, if you would like to know more about us here at Fam Church, you can go out to myfamchurch.com, look over everything, get to know us, and if you have any prayer requests, please go to the contact section of our website, send us your prayer request, and we will pray for you. Now, our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
My name is Brian. I'm the lead pastor here. We are excited that you are with us this morning. And our heart, our goal, our passion here at Fam Church is to lead people of all backgrounds in Mulberry and the surrounding area to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We want to reach this community. We want to see people's lives changed and transformed because our church is here in this community. And if you're here for the first time this morning, we're glad that you're here with us. If you're in church for the first time or the first time in a long time, we're really excited you're here this morning. If you're here because you heard a rumor that we were giving away steak and lobster today, I hate to disappoint you, but there is no steak and there is no lobster. Okay, but we at Fam Church believe, even though we don't have steak and lobster today, that you being here, you hearing what we have to say, you being involved in the service is going to draw you closer to God than you ever have been before. And so it's the Sunday after Easter. We're starting a new series called The Best Question Ever. And it's a series based on a book by Andy Stanley called Ask It. And basically what we're going to be looking at is one question in life. The premise is there is one question in life that if we put this question into our life and look at the circumstances, the situations, and the places that we get ourselves into, and we ask this one question, it is going to make a huge difference in our lives. And it's going to cause us to live a life that's not full of regret because of bad decisions we have made, but it's going to be a life that's full and lived to the fullest. And so when you think about that, the first thing, of course, that pops into my mind is the whole concept of questions in the first place. You know, how many of you like to ask questions? Are there question askers in here this morning? Whenever you just got to ask a bunch of questions. You know, maybe you don't like questions because every time you go someplace with your kids, the question that they ask in the car is, "Are we there yet?" And so you don't want to hear questions. Or maybe you've got a neighbor who likes to ask a lot of questions. I've got a neighbor who likes to ask a lot of questions. You know, he wants to know everything that's going on in your life, everything that's going on in your family, everything that's going on in your home. He's always asking questions. Now, the reason he's asking questions is because he wants to know the latest scoop, the latest dish, the latest gossip in the neighborhood. I mean, I had one of the other neighbors tell me, just go ask that guy because he knows everything that's going on. He knows all the gossip. And I'm like, oh, but that's who he is. He's always asking questions. Okay, and sometimes, have you ever asked a question and you regretted ever asking the question? Okay, been in those situations before. Yeah. I had this one student one time who I was teaching him how to play the guitar. He was going to be the guitar player on our worship team in a youth ministry. And so we were at the office. We're in the office at the church one Saturday morning, and we're sitting there, and I'm teaching him some stuff on the guitar. He's playing. I'm just helping him, and he's I got to go to the bathroom. I'm like, okay, go to the bathroom. He goes to the bathroom. He comes back into my office like 5 minutes later, and he's like, Pastor, I got a problem. And so my thought is, a middle school boy coming out of the bathroom and saying he's got a problem, I don't want to know what the problem is. Okay, because if he needs help doing something in there, I am not the guy to help him with that. But I asked the question anyway, what's wrong? And it was after I asked that question, I regretted ever asking. Because he said to me, well, I was in there and I downloaded all of the stuff I needed to download into the toilet. And as I turned to flush the toilet and walk away, I looked in the toilet bowl. And when I looked in the toilet bowl, I saw worms all over my doo-doo. And I got to be honest with you, I panicked. Why? Because I had shaken this kid's hand. Okay? Because I'd been working with him. He had been touching my guitar with his hands. And if you don't know what why that's important is because that's how intestinal worms are generally spread, okay? The said infected person takes their hand that has been places that maybe it shouldn't have been, and they come and they shake someone else's hand, or they walk into a building and they grab a doorknob, they push a door open, they maybe make a sandwich for someone. I know, isn't this good stuff? You don't get this anywhere else in Mulberry. Come on. And then the unsuspecting person eats said eggs and somebody else is infected. Okay? That's how it works. And so I immediately am like, dude, get in the car. And we headed to CVS, bought the anti-worm medicine that they had at CVS. He took some, and then I took some because I had shaken this boy's hand and he had been in my car. And then when I got home, I literally got in the car, vacuumed all of the seats, Lysoled everything down because I was not getting infected with intestinal worms. But that's a day that I had wished I'd never asked a question. Well, our question, the best question ever, is not going to be one of the ones that we're going to regret asking, okay? And to discover this question, we're going to be looking in the book of Proverbs. And so Proverbs, it's a book in the Old Testament. We're only going to be looking at a few verses in there, but it's an interesting book, okay? It's believed to have been put together by a guy named Solomon, who was king in Israel. Okay? And he did not come up with the sayings in there. It wasn't like he sat down with a pen and just thought, what smart things can I think of, and start writing them down. That's not how it happened. What happened was he just kind of collected. He was a collector of wise sayings, and at some point in time, he eventually organized these wise sayings into a book, the book of Proverbs. And the word Proverbs is really interesting in and of itself, and it speaks of the intent that Solomon had when he wrote this book. In Hebrew, the language that the book of Proverbs was originally written in, the word Proverbs means skill in living. But it's not just a general skill. That was a gasp that I heard come. That was kind of cool. I've never had a gasp when I've said something before. But he's not just talking about a general skill. It's a wisdom that comes from God's perspective. And the belief of Solomon is that applying what's written in this book, taking it and applying it to your life, is going to make you wise. It's going to make you wise in God's eyes, and it's going to give you greater happiness in your life. And that's what Proverbs chapter 1 begins with, God. It talks about how God is the foundation, and fear of the Lord is the foundation in gaining wisdom. Now, when I say fear of the Lord, a lot of things pop into our heads, right? You know, because we think of fear. How many of you have ever been in a place, you watched a horror movie and it scared you? Or maybe in the middle of the night you thought somebody was breaking into your house, or somebody actually did break into your house. You've been in those situations before? Yeah, I don't know. When we lived in Marion Oaks in Ocala, we had this 2-story house, and loud noises kind of like startle me awake in the middle of the night. And so we were sleeping. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I thought I heard this loud bang. Okay, and I don't know if the bang actually happened or if it was something that just was in a dream that I was having, but I heard this loud bang, and I shot straight up in bed. My heart starts racing. It's pounding. I'm thinking somebody is coming in the back sliding door of the house because it was such a large bang. And so I jump out of bed, and I'm full of adrenaline, and I'm scared, and I'm pumped up, and I'm fired up, and I already have a baseball bat next to the side of my bed. And so I jump up, and I grab the bat, and I go running for downstairs. Well, in bare feet on carpet, sometimes it gets a little slippery, right? And so I hit the top step like this, and I went falling down the rest of the stairs, just crashed to the bottom of the stairs. Thankfully, there was no one breaking in the house, and so nobody else saw this because everyone else was asleep. But it was a fear, and that's what we think of when we think of fear, is being startled awake in the middle of the night and terrified for your life. But that is not what the fear of the Lord is that Proverbs is talking about in the opening of this section. This is a reverence, it's a respect for God and who He is, where you look at situations and circumstances and ask yourself, what is God saying, or what is God wanting me to do? That's what's meant by fear here. And this is where the basis of this book starts. It assumes that the person reading it is looking to live their life the way God wants them to. And so with that, if you know where Proverbs is, you are welcome to turn there. Proverbs, if you've heard of it, but you're not sure exactly where it's at. It's in the Old Testament. It's at right after Psalms. You go Psalms, Proverbs. It's on page 513 in my Bible, if that helps anyone out there. You know, if you've got the same Bible as me. If you got trouble finding it, it's cool. We're going to put it up here on the screen behind me so that you can follow along with what we're reading. And for this study, we're going to be reading from the New Living Translation of the Bible. And I know it can get confusing with all these different Bible translations, and so we're not going to talk about that, but if you've got questions about that, if you're not sure why we've got all these different translations, you can email me at pastorbrian@myfamchurch.com, and we can engage in a dialogue about that. Some week I may talk about it, but it's not relevant to this series that we are in right now. But the foundational verse that we're going to look at is in chapter 13 of Proverbs, and we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 16, and this is what it says there. It says, "Wise people think before they act. Fools don't, and even brag about it." Think is the key word here. There's a reason that wise people think before they make a decision. Okay? Wise people think before they make a decision because they understand that just one simple decision in our life can have long-ranging consequences. Consequences that can continue for months or years after the event has happened. And so people who are wise, they stop and think. And teenagers, listen to me. I know you think that you're young and that some of these things aren't going to catch up to you, but you are at the age now, once you have gotten over 12, that decisions that you make are going to have consequences, and some of those consequences can last all of your adult life until you die. And so you need to hear what we are talking about here this morning. Because your consequences are a lot different when you're a 6-year-old versus a 13-year-old, okay? If you're a 6-year-old and you take a crayon and you go into the dining room and you draw something on the wall, what are the consequences for that? Okay, your mom takes away your crayons. Your mom maybe gets mad at you. She makes you clean the wall and wash it off, okay? The consequences are not that great. I mean, one of my children, who will remain nameless even though none of them are in here this morning, did something like this when she was that age. My mom at her house has this beautiful table. It's a cherry wood dining room table. This table cost $6,000. I was blown away when she told me how much she paid for this table. Well, one of my children one day was sitting at said table, and she thought it was a good idea to write her name on the table. However, she didn't do it with a crayon. She did it with a piece of metal and etched it into my mom's table. My mom wasn't very happy at the time. Now when we go to her house and we see my daughter's name carved on the table, we all laugh about it. So, I mean, the consequences weren't that great for her decision. However, as we get older, the consequences of our decisions become greater. We are faced, you guys who are teenagers, are faced with the decision now of what shall you do as far as your education goes. Should I graduate and go to this college and spend that money and take out that much student loans in order to get the degree that I am looking for? And the consequences of that are you could be looking at a long-term situation where you're paying back a lot of money to the federal government that you borrowed. I'm living proof of that as I'm still dealing with the consequences of my school decisions. You know, others of us have been in a place where the decisions that we made have turned into an addiction that led to problems in our life. We made a decision to take that drink, smoke that blunt, take a hit off that pipe, swallow that pill, or even just hang out with this person. Do you know how many people have said to me, it all started with hanging out with this guy, with this girl, and those decisions have led to consequences, lasting consequences. You know, maybe it wasn't that serious. Maybe you made a decision to marry somebody. Maybe you made a decision to take a job. Maybe you made a decision to buy the house, and you're sitting there now, years later, still having to deal with the consequences of a decision that you probably should have made in a different direction. And the deal is that part of the problem with making decisions comes from an assumption we all make. See, there's a basic belief when it comes to decision making, and it's this. As we get older, we become better decision makers. Okay, one of my daughters once had a shirt that said, "I don't need to do homework because every day I'm older and therefore wiser." Okay, she used to wear this shirt all the time. But we make the assumption, right, that the older we get, the wiser we get, and the better decisions that we make. Can I tell you, if you set up a pattern in your life as a teenager at making bad decisions and you don't do something to alter that decision-making process, when you get into your 20s, you're going to make bad decisions. When you get into your 30s, you're going to make bad decisions. When you get into your 50s, you're going to make bad decisions. See, the deal is that our brain is wired to be lazy. Okay, you guys wonder why people are lazy? Our brain is wired that way. They've done studies and they found that once your brain figures out a way to do something, it will continue to do things that way, whether it's the easy way to do them or not, because it doesn't have to think. It can just make a shortcut. Zoop, do that. Zoop, do that. Zoop, do that. And so when we get into a habit of making bad decisions, that becomes the wiring in our brain. And so we just do bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And unless we change that, unless that pattern is changed, we continue to make bad decisions. We continue to live a life where we're constantly looking back with regret. And we got to think, none of us when we were kids planned to make bad decisions with our life, did we? If we were to get on the church van and head to where the homeless are at here in Mulberry, or not in Mulberry, in Lakeland, and we were to get off and we were just to start to go up to the homeless and ask them the question, hey, when you were 6 years old, when you were 8 years old, was this the plan for your life? Did you say to yourself, man, I am going to do something so stupid, I'm going to make such bad decisions that my life, I am going to end up living on the streets in Lakeland, Florida? How many of them are going to say yes to that? I don't think we'll find one. Or if we were to go to the county jail and go in and interview those that are being held, waiting trial at serious crimes or any crime really, and we were to ask them, hey, when you were like 10 years old, was this your dream? Was this your goal? Did you sit there saying to yourself, man, I can't wait until I'm 20 years old and can live the rest of my life in prison? See, nobody makes that kind of decision with their life. No one plans to screw up their life. No one wants their life to be a mess. No one plans to make a bunch of choices that are going to lead to hurt and pain and regret. So the question becomes then, where do the problems occur in our lives that cause us to make so many wrong choices? Well, the problems occur in the questions that we do ask. And there's two basic questions that we ask when we're going to make a decision. And the two that we usually ask are bad because they lead us up to the edge of regret, the edge of bad decisions. And the first question that we ask ourselves is this: what is my heart telling me to do? I know so many people who go through life constantly asking this question: what is my heart telling me to do? What are emotions telling me on how to live my life? But I want you to think about this for a minute. If we were to live our life constantly going with what our heart and our emotions was telling us to do, how many of us would be in jail right now? I probably would, okay? Because I'll tell you the truth, okay? My heart tells me some pretty crazy things. When I'm at McDonald's, okay? You guys are going to find out all kinds of stuff. I'm at McDonald's and I see the guy carrying the tray with 5 French fries and 5 drinks and a stack of sandwiches, and he's kind of going like this. You know what my heart's telling me? You need to get out your phone, open up your video camera, and find a way to trip the dude so that you can get some cool video of like these French fries and drinks flying through the air, slow motion so it hits the ground, right? That's totally what I'm thinking. Then I can put this on Facebook, I can put this on YouTube, I can put this on WorldStar, and it's going to be an internet sensation. Now, WorldStar would probably be my best bet in this situation. If you want to know what's wrong with the world, spend a few minutes watching some WorldStar videos. You'll figure it out real quick. But, see, even though my heart is telling me to do that, that's a really, really bad decision. You see, there's something that we need to know about our heart and why going with our heart, why going with our feelings is such a bad idea. I'm going to read from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17, verses 9 and 10. You don't need to turn there. It'll be on the screen behind me, and this is what it says. The human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? But I, the Lord, search all hearts and examine secret motives. I give all people their due reward according to what their actions deserve. Our heart is deceitful and wicked. And I know that some of you walked in the door this morning and were not wanting to hear that. You walked in and said, oh man, he's calling my heart wicked. You're a punk. Well, can I tell you that I know from personal experience that my heart is deceitful and wicked, that my emotions and my feelings are giving me bad advice all the time? All I've got to do is take 5 minutes and just look at my marriage. You know, if sometime Dana ticks me off and I'm not happy with her, my heart and my emotions are saying, you know what? You need to get rid of her. There's so many better women out there that would take better care of you than she would. You just need to cut this thing off, cut your losses now, and move on to something better. Go get and sign up for that eHarmony account and let's do this. My heart is wicked and evil. And I think that if all of us were to take that journey deep down into our heart and be honest with ourselves, we'd see the exact same thing in our heart. And so that's a bad question. Do not ask what your heart and what your feelings are telling you, because that question almost always takes us to a place where we're standing on the edge of regret. The second bad question we ask is this: is there anything wrong with it? See, what we do is we'll look at a situation, we'll look at a circumstance, and we'll say to ourselves, is there anything wrong with what I'm about to do? We'll say, is this decision immoral? Is this decision illegal? Is this decision unethical? And if we ask those questions and the answer to all of them is no, then we think it's a good decision. I will say doing that is better than going with your heart, but doing that still is not the best way to make decisions. Why do I say that? Because a series of there's nothing wrong with it questions leads us up to the very edge of making a really bad decision. Because I've watched it. I've watched people ask a series of, is there anything wrong with it questions. You know, it's like, let's take boyfriend and girlfriend, for example. And I've just seen this repeated over and over again. You've got a guy and a girl who are dating each other. And so they decide, you know what, we really like each other and we just want to spend some time alone together. And so they say to themselves, is there anything wrong with us spending time alone together? And the answer is no. There's nothing immoral about being alone. There's nothing unethical about being alone with somebody you love. There's nothing illegal about being alone with somebody. So suddenly it goes from just the two of you, now you got to be alone in a place where nobody's at. Well, we just want to chill, Netflix and chill. I want to say that, but I know that for teenagers, that's a really bad thing. You know, they'll just say, hey, let's just hang out and watch some movies, okay? And so they'll just get separated even one more level. You know, is there anything wrong with sitting and watching movies with this person that you love? No, there's nothing unethical about it. No, there's nothing immoral about it. There's nothing illegal about it. And so then they segregate themselves off and are sitting in a room by themselves. Then the next question is, well, can't we just kiss and make out a little bit? There's nothing immoral about that. There's nothing unethical about that. There is nothing illegal about that. But do you see how with each question you move a step closer to the edge? You move a step closer and closer and closer, and it pushes you down a path that it's hard to pull back from. But what we do with that question is we use it to try and get as close to sin as possible without going over the edge. I mean, that's what most Christians, we like to do. We like to get as close to sin as possible without falling. We want to get as much out of this life as we can with still be able to go to heaven, but get as close to sin as we possibly can. And so how we do that is we ask ourselves a series of questions that say, is there anything wrong with it? But what happens when we constantly live on the edge like that? What happens when you're constantly living on the edge? It's much easier to fall off, right? There's this place called Palisade Heads, and it's on Lake Superior. and it comes straight up out of the lake. It's a 300-foot rock face that drops straight down into the lake. They have no guardrails. They have nothing there. You can literally walk up to the edge of this thing and look 300 feet straight down to the rocks in the water below. It's pretty wild when you walk up, because I've done it. I've walked up to the edge of it like this and gone like this, and it's like you feel this vertigo thing, like you're, it's pretty wild. But if you were to go there, would you walk up there and be like, hey, oh? No, none of us would do that. Why not? Because one little wet spot on the rock, one little gust of wind, and we're dead, right? We're falling 300 feet and hitting some rock, and we're not going to recover from that. But when we ask ourselves the series of, is there anything wrong with it questions, that's exactly what we're doing. Should I surf the internet at 1 a.m.? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal about that. There's nothing immoral about that, but we're putting ourselves on the edge of a cliff when we ask that question, that all it takes is one wrong click from our mouse, one wrong move on our computer, and suddenly we go over the edge and we have an addiction. We have something that's holding our life that messes up everything and messes up our relationships. So the question, is there anything wrong with it, is not a good question to ask either. So you're saying to yourself, well, if we're not to ask about our heart and emotions and we're not to ask if there's anything wrong with it, what question are we to ask? Proverbs 14:8 says this, the wise look ahead and see what's coming, but fools deceive themselves. See, the question we are to ask ourselves in this situation is, what is the wise thing to do? And so I'm going to illustrate this thing by telling you a story. And I have permission from the person to tell this story, just in case you were wondering. It's not a bad story, so don't think there's anything wrong with the story. But there's two people that work full-time for the church, okay? It's myself and Lisa. And if you don't know who Lisa is, she's the church administrator. She keeps things rolling and moving and functioning properly. Because we're the only two full-time people here, we have to work close together. I mean, there's some weeks that I literally spend more time with her than I do my family, okay? And because of this, we have to establish boundaries in our life. One of the boundaries that we have established is that we will never go to lunch together, just the two of us. Okay, that's one of the boundaries we've established. Now, if you're living your life asking the question, is there anything wrong with that? You're going to say to yourself, what is wrong with the two of you going to lunch? There's nothing wrong in going to a public place with somebody that you're not married to and just eating lunch. Everybody can see you. Everybody can see what's going on. I mean, that's pretty risk-free. Why is that such a big deal? But here's what happens. And I can speak on this because I watched it with somebody that I am very close with. And this is what happens. Okay, you start to go to lunch with this person. Well, see, questions eventually evolve but it moves beyond business, work, and general life stuff. Because you run out of those things to talk about, and so soon the conversations get to a little bit more heart-level stuff. You start to talk about goals, you start to talk about dreams, you start to talk about aspirations, you start to talk about problems in your home, you start to talk about problems with your spouse. And see what happens, and you say to yourself, was there anything wrong with that? Well, no, there's nothing wrong with talking with somebody about those things. But see, you're once again pushing closer and closer to an edge that you don't want to go off of when you do that. See, you're getting yourself closer and closer because what happens is as you get that connection emotionally with that person because of how the questions and the things that you talk about change, what happens is that barrier that may have been there because both of you were married starts to get erased. And the wall starts to come down. And pretty soon, what happens when one of those people is having severe problems, especially with their spouse, who's the first person they call? They call the other person that they were in this relationship, that they've just asked a series of there's nothing wrong with it questions, and have erased a wall and broken down the barrier and are standing on the edge of disaster. You're standing there on the edge with your foot dangling off, and all it takes is one little push, one little gust, and you go over the edge. Lewis, if you could come on back. See, we have decided not to allow ourselves to get close to the edge of the cliff. And we've decided instead to ask the question, what is wise? The wise thing for us is to not to go to lunch alone. See, when we ask that question, when we set that boundary, what it does is rather than having the edge be right up here, where one small step leads to pain and hurt and consequences, we have set the boundary back here. Much safer, much more protective. Because if I were to ask Lewis to come off the keyboard and say, okay, Lewis, what I want you to do is I want you to push me off the edge. I'm standing here like this, Lewis. Push me off the edge. How hard would it be for him to do it? Not very hard. He could probably use one arm and knock me off the edge. But if I'm standing back here because I've set a barrier back here and said, what is the wise thing to do? It's going to be much harder for him to push me off the edge. Why? Because I can resist him. Because I have a place to set my feet. Because if he gains a couple of feet, I still have much more to go and I can push back. And that's what Lisa and I did in asking this question is, what is the wise thing to do? We've set our boundary back here. Because what are the consequences back here? Lisa and I go to lunch together without somebody else around. Okay, what happens? We tell our spouse. Our spouse maybe has a conversation with us about that was a bad idea. And that's the end of it, right? But if I'm standing up here and I get that push and I go over the edge, what are the consequences? I lose my job. I lose friends. I maybe lose my wife and my kids. See, God has set up this question. What is the wise thing to do so that we can have a barrier in our life between the pain and the hurt and the regret that lie over there and the safe life that He has for us? And so when we're faced with decisions in our life, listen, don't ask the question, is there anything wrong with it? Definitely don't ask the question, what is my heart saying? Instead, ask the question, what is the wise thing to do? So that you can set your boundary back here, so that you can walk in wisdom and you can live the life that God has for you to live without the regret, without the pain, without the hurt of being pushed over the edge because you said, what? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And got closer and closer to the edge until finally you went over